The Meadowlark was a small ship, barely larger than a cargo hauler, and it drifted through the empty darkness of the Velen corridor like a leaf caught in an endless black river. Its engines hummed quietly as 12 souls worked and laughed and dreamed inside its metal walls. Unaware that death was racing toward them at impossible speed, Dr. Elena Voss stood at the observation window, her coffee growing cold in her hands as she watched the distant stars spin slowly past. She was a botanist, 53 years old, and she had spent her entire career studying alien plant life on worlds most humans would never see, and she loved every moment of it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" asked Captain Marcus Chun, stepping up beside her with his own cup of something that smelled like tea. "Every time I think I have seen enough stars, I find more," Elena replied, smiling at the older man who had become something like a brother to her over the past 18 months. The Meadowlark carried a crew of 12, 4 scientists, 6 research technicians, and 2 pilots who also served as the ship's entire security force. They were not soldiers, not warriors, not anyone important by galactic standards, just humans doing what humans had always done, reaching out into the unknown, because they could not help themselves in the cargo bay below. Young Thomas Park was cataloging soil samples from their last planetary stop while listening to music from Earth that was over 300 years old. Beside him, Dayuki Tanakano, relation to the admiral she had never met, was running chemical analyses and humming along to the same ancient songs. They were happy. They were peaceful. They were completely unaware of the 7 ships that had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel behind them. The first warning came as a scream from the ship's eye, a synthetic voice that suddenly filled every corridor with urgent sound. "Alert, hostile vessels detected evasive. Action recommended alert." Captain Chun was already running toward the bridge, his tea forgotten and spilling across the floor as his boots pounded against metal. Elena followed him, her heart racing with a fear she had never known in all her years among the stars on the bridge. Pilot Sarah Wong was fighting with the controls, her fingers dancing across panels that flashed red and orange with warnings. 7 ships, Captain Vraxian configuration. They came out of nowhere. The Vraxians were known throughout the galaxy as raiders and slavers, a species that survived by taking what others had built. They were not the worst predators in the cosmos, but they were bad enough. And they had a particular taste for capturing what they called soft species, those without natural weapons or defenses. "Get us out of here," Chun shouted, but even as the words left his mouth, the first energy blast struck the Meadowlark's engines, and the entire ship shuddered like a wounded animal in the cargo bay. Thomas was thrown against the wall hard enough to crack 2 ribs. In the medical bay, Dr. Hassan tried to grab the surgical table but missed and fell. Throughout the ship, humans tumbled and crashed and cried out in pain and fear. The second blast took out their communications array, and the third destroyed their faster-than-light drive completely. The Meadowlark was crippled, drifting, helpless on the lead Vraxian ship. Torvuk the Render watched the human vessel spin slowly in the void and felt satisfaction spread through his massive chest. He was large, even for a Vraxian, nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin like cracked stone. And he had been raiding the space lanes for over 40 years, 12 life signs, his sensor officer reported. A smaller Vraxian with nervous eyes. All human, no significant weapons detected. Torvuk made a sound that served as laughter among his kind, a deep rumbling that came from somewhere in his thick throat. "Humans," he said, tasting the word like it was something bitter. "New to the stars, soft as larvae, worth almost nothing at market, but almost nothing was still something." And Torvuk had not survived this long by leaving credits floating in space. He ordered the boarding parties to prepare back on the Meadowlark. Captain Chun gathered his crew in the main corridor, all 12 of them bruised and bleeding and terrified. Sarah Wong had a gash above her eye that would not stop bleeding. And young Thomas was holding his broken ribs with both arms wrapped around his chest. "Listen to me," Chun said, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "Our weapons are gone, our engines are gone, and help is very far away, but we are not dead yet." Elena watched him speak and felt something like pride mixed with her terror. This was what humans did. She realized they stood together when everything was falling apart. They found strength in each other when they had none left alone. Before they hit the communications array, the AI sent out an SOS, Chun continued. It was small, just our coordinates and registry and 3 words, but it went out, and someone will hear it. "Who?" asked Dr. Hassan, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. "Who will come for 12 scientists in the middle of nowhere?" Chun did not have an answer, but he tried to smile anyway. "We are human," he said simply. "Someone always comes." The Vraxian boarding party breached the airlock 17 minutes later, and the crew of the Meadowlark was taken without a single shot fired. They were bound with energy restraints and marched through corridors that smelled of metal and something worse. Something that spoke of old violence and older cruelty. Torvik examined his prizes personally, walking among them with his forearms clasped behind his back. He saw nothing impressive. No claws, no fangs. No natural armor, just soft pink creatures with strange round eyes that watched him with a mixture of fear and something else he could not quite identify. "You will bring a modest price," he told them, speaking through a translator that made his rumbling voice sound almost gentle. "Be grateful I have killed for less, Elena." Voss looked up at the massive alien and felt her fear transform into something harder and colder. She did not know what it was yet, but she held on to it like a weapon she might need later somewhere in the darkness of space. Traveling at the speed of light, a tiny signal raced toward the place humans called home. It carried only coordinates, a ship registry, and 3 small words. "Crew still alive." It was a whisper, a cry, a prayer sent into the void by desperate souls who did not know if anyone was listening. Someone was listening. Someone was always listening. 14 hours after the Meadowlark went silent, a communications officer on Luna Station sat up straight in her chair and said 3 words that would change galactic history. "We have contact." The message was small, barely a whisper against the background noise of the universe. But the computers caught it and cleaned it and presented it to human eyes. Coordinates in the Velen corridor, the registry of a research vessel called Meadowlark, and 3 words that made the young officer's blood run cold. "Crew still alive." That meant they had been alive when the message was sent. That meant someone had attacked them. That meant 12 human beings were out there in the darkness, waiting, hoping, praying for rescue. The officer forwarded the message to her superior, who forwarded it to his superior, who forwarded it to the one person who needed to see it most, Admiral Yuki Tanaka, commander of Turcom. The Terran Emergency Response Command Admiral Tanaka was 67 years old. Small and thin, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen more than any person should have to see. She had lost her first command 30 years ago. A transport ship ambushed by pirates while she watched helplessly from a damaged escape pod. And she had sworn then that no human would ever feel that helpless again while she drew breath. She read the message once, then twice, then set her coffee down with a hand that did not tremble, even though her heart was breaking. "Get me fleet command," she said quietly, and her aide knew from the tone of her voice that something terrible was about to happen, not to humanity, but to whoever had made the mistake of touching what was theirs. 1 hour later, Admiral Tanaka stood before a holographic display showing the full might of Earth's military forces. There were ships stationed across 100 star systems, soldiers training on a dozen worlds, weapons platforms orbiting strategic locations throughout human space. 12 souls, she said to the assembled officers. her voice carrying through the command center like a bell. 12 scientists on a research vessel in unregulated space attacked. Captured. Status unknown. She paused and looked at the faces around her. Young and old, men and women, humans of every shade and background, united by something that went deeper than blood. By the authority granted to me by Earth Council, I am activating Directive 7. A murmur ran through the room because Directive 7 was not used lightly. It was the doctrine that had been written in the blood of 1,000,000 human tragedies throughout history. The promise that humanity had made to itself when it first reached the stars. No human life is negotiable. No human call goes unanswered. No human stands alone. Admiral Tanaka began issuing orders. And the greatest war machine the galaxy had ever seen began to wake. The 14th Expeditionary Fleet received its orders at 0300 hour station time. And within minutes, 47 warships were powering up their engines and plotting courses for the Velen corridor. Cruisers and destroyers and frigates, each one carrying enough firepower to level a city. All of them ready to fly across the stars for 12 people. They had never met 3 Leviathan-class dreadnoughts, the unconquered sun. The Remember Earth and the Silent Thunder disconnected from their orbital stations and joined the fleet. These were the largest ships humanity had ever built. Each one 5 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust too. 100,000 combat personnel received deployment orders. And they grabbed their gear and kissed their loved ones goodbye and marched to their transports without a single complaint. They were soldiers, and this was what they had trained for. 7 Stellar Marine Division loaded onto assault carriers. 10,000 men and women in powered armor who had been taught one simple truth from their first day of training: you never leave anyone behind. Not ever. Not for any reason. 2 coordinated drone swarms were activated. 40,000 autonomous weapons platforms that moved like flocks of metal birds, thinking faster than any organic mind and killing with perfect precision. And then there was the Prometheus. The Prometheus was a ship that did not officially exist. Its name appeared in no records. Its crew was listed as deceased. And its technology was so far beyond standard human capabilities that most admirals thought it was a myth. But Admiral Tanaka knew the truth. Because she had helped build it, she sent a single coded message to a location that was not on any star chart. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, something ancient and terrible began to move galactic. Observers watching human communications traffic could not believe what they were seeing. The Morvathi hegemony, the oldest military power in the known galaxy, detected the fleet movements and immediately convened an emergency council. This cannot be correct, the Morvathi High Commander said, staring at the data with all 6 of his eyes. They are mobilizing forces sufficient to conquer 3 star systems for 12 individuals. The Athari Consortium, masters of commerce and calculation, ran the numbers 17 times and got the same impossible answer each time. The resources being expended, the fuel being burned. The economic cost of pulling this many ships from their stations, it was enough to buy a small planet. They must be planning an invasion, an Athari analyst concluded. This response makes no sense otherwise. But humanity was not planning an invasion. Humanity was simply doing what humanity had always done when one of its own was in danger. The collective assembly, the closest thing the galaxy had to a united government, sent an urgent diplomatic query to Earth. Is this a declaration of total war against the Vraxian species? Admiral Tanaka received the message and smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes. She dictated her response personally. 4 words that would be studied by alien historians for centuries to come. We are picking up survivors. The fleet departed from 17 different locations across human space, converging on the Velen corridor like streams flowing toward an ocean. From Earth and Mars and the colonies of Alpha Centauri, from mining stations and military bases and quiet research outposts, They came. Captain James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the destroyer, relentless, and watched the stars streak past as his ship pushed its engines to their maximum safe limit. He thought about the 12 people waiting in the darkness, about their fear and their hope. And he pushed his engines a little harder. Private Maria Santos checked her rifle for the 100th time in the cramped confines of a troop transport. Surrounded by other Marines who were doing the same thing, none of them knew the people they were going to save, but that did not matter. They were human. And that was enough. Admiral Tanaka stood alone in her quarters and looked at a photograph that she kept in her breast pocket. A picture of her grandmother as a young woman, smiling in front of a house that no longer existed in a country that had been destroyed by war. No one had come for her grandmother, and she had died alone. Wondering if anyone remembered her name. Never again. Admiral Tanaka whispered to the photograph. Not while I live. The fleet was coming. And the galaxy would learn what it meant to take something from humanity. The SOS had been small, just coordinates, and a registry and 3 desperate words. The response was anything but small. The response was extinction level. Torvik the render was eating his midday meal when his sensor officer burst through the door with terror painted across his gray face. The smaller Vraxian was breathing hard, his forehands shaking, his words tumbling out so fast that Torvik could barely understand them. Ships, the officer gasped. Human ships at the edge of the system, many ships, so many ships. Torvik set down his food and felt the first cold touch of something he had not experienced in decades: uncertainty. He had expected a response to the captured humans, of course. Perhaps a patrol frigate or a diplomatic vessel with stern words and empty threats. But the way his officer was shaking suggested something far worse. How many? Torvik demanded, rising from his seat and walking toward the command center of his asteroid base. The sensor officer made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. I counted 10, my lord, then 20, then 40, and they are still coming. Torvik pushed through the doors of his command center and stopped cold, staring at the main display screen with all 4 of his arms hanging limp at his sides. The screen showed the edge of his system, and it was filled with contacts, red dots representing human warships. So many that they overlapped and merged into a solid wall of crimson death. Impossible, he whispered. And for the first time in 40 years of raiding, his voice held something like fear. The human fleet arrived like a storm breaking over a helpless shore. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 47 warships from the 14th Expeditionary Fleet spreading out to cover every approach, every escape route, every possible path to freedom. Behind them came the dreadnoughts. 3 mountains of metal and fury that blotted out the stars themselves. The unconquered sun took position at the center of the formation, its weapons already powered and tracking targets, its massive hull casting a shadow that seemed to darken the very fabric of space drone swarms deployed from carrier vessels. 40,000 units splitting into hunting packs that flowed between asteroids like predators searching for prey. They made no sound in the vacuum, but somehow their silence was more terrifying than any battle cry. And still more ships arrived, troop transports, carrying 200,000 soldiers. Support vessels loaded with supplies for a long campaign. Medical ships standing ready to receive casualties. And warships upon warships upon warships. The Vraxians on the asteroid base watched their screens and felt something break inside their hearts. They were raiders, predators who survived by choosing weak prey and avoiding strong enemies. And they had never seen anything like this. They sent a fleet, one of them said, his voice hollow with disbelief. They sent an entire fleet for 12 scientists. Torvik stared at the display and felt his certainty crumbling like stone beneath a hammer. He had studied humans, or thought he had soft creatures, emotional. Weak, but the force before him spoke of something he had failed to understand. Something vast and terrible that lurked beneath their gentle surface. Admiral Tanaka watched the tactical display from the bridge of the unconquered sun and felt a cold satisfaction settle into her bones. She could see the Vraxian base on her screen, a cluster of asteroids that had been hollowed out and connected, home to perhaps 3,000 raiders who had thought themselves safe in the darkness between stars. All weapons locked on target, her tactical officer reported. We have firing solutions on every ship and structure in the system. Open a channel, Admiral Tanaka said. All frequencies, all languages, I want them to hear this. The channel opened, and her voice carried across the void to every Vraxian ear. This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Navy. You have 12 of our people, and you will return them unharmed within 1 standard hour. She paused and let the silence stretch. Let them look at their screens and count the ships and understand exactly how badly they had miscalculated. This is not a negotiation, she continued, a voice calm and cold and utterly without mercy. There will be no second offer. Your decision in the next 60 minutes will determine whether your species has a future on the Vraxian homeworld. 500 light-years away, the High Council watched the confrontation through long-range sensors and felt their world shifting beneath their feet. They were the rulers of a species that had survived for 10,000 years by knowing when to fight and when to flee. And they knew with absolute certainty that this was a time to flee. Disavow him, the eldest counselor said, her voice trembling with urgency. Declare Torvak and his clan renegades, criminals, enemies of the Vraxian people. Distance ourselves before the humans decide we are all responsible. Will they believe us? Another counselor asked. Eldest looked at the screen showing the human fleet and felt something she had never felt. The genuine terror of another species. I do not know, she admitted, but we must try. Because if they decide to come for us next, nothing in this galaxy can stop them. Back at the asteroid base, Torvak stood before his crew and tried to find words that would give them courage. He was still a raider, still proud, still unable to accept that he had made a mistake that might cost him everything. They are bluffing, he said, though his voice lacked the conviction it once held. They will not destroy us for 12 worthless scientists. The cost will be too high. The political consequences too severe. His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Kreth, stepped forward with doubt written across his features. My lord, I have studied humans since we took their ship. They do not think like us. They do not calculate value the way we do. What do you mean? Torvak demanded. Kreth pulled up data on the nearest screen, images and records from human history that he had gathered over the past days. They once fought a war that killed millions of their own kind to free people they had never met. They once sailed across oceans in wooden ships to rescue single survivors of disasters. They once spent fortunes that could have fed nations to bring home the bodies of fallen soldiers. He turned to face his commander with something like awe and horror mixed in his eyes. They are not bluffing, my lord. They are simply being human. And we have made the mistake of taking something they consider precious. Torvak looked at the screen showing the human fleet, at the weapons pointed at his base, at the countdown timer that showed 53 minutes remaining. And he felt his pride warring with his survival instinct in the holding cells below. 12 humans sat in darkness and waited. They could not see the fleet that had come for them, could not know that 200,000 of their brothers and sisters were positioned just kilometers away, ready to die for them if necessary. Elena Voss held Captain Chen's hand and tried to believe that someone was coming, that the SOS had been heard, that they were not alone in the darkness. She did not know that the sky outside had turned to iron, that the stars had been replaced by warships, that humanity had answered her call with all the fury and love and terrible determination that had carried them from caves to the stars. But she would learn in 53 minutes. She would learn what it meant to be human, and why the galaxy had been right to fear them all along. The countdown timer showed 11 minutes remaining when Torvok made the decision that would end his existence. He stood before his crew with all four arms crossed over his chest, his pride burning so hot that it blinded him to the death waiting outside his walls. "We do not surrender," he announced, his voice echoing through the command center. "We do not bow to threats from soft creatures who have forgotten what strength means. Bring me one of the prisoners." His guards dragged Dr. Elena Voss into the command center, her wrists still bound, her face bruised from the rough handling. But her eyes held something that should have warned Torvok. Something hard and cold and utterly unafraid. "You will deliver a message," Torvok said, activating a recording device and pointing it at himself and his captive. "You will show your fleet what happens to those who threaten Torvok the Render." He drew the ceremonial blade from his belt, a curved weapon that had taken 100 lives, and he held it where the camera could see. Elena looked at the blade and then at the monster holding it. And she smiled, actually smiled, as if she knew something he did not. "They will come for you," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the death standing before her. "Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday they will find you and everyone who helped you. And they will make you answer for this moment." Torvok laughed and raised his blade. "Your people are weak," he said. "They will mourn you and then forget you, like all soft creatures forget their dead." The blade fell. Elena Voss died with her eyes open, still smiling, still certain of the truth she had spoken. Her body crumpled to the floor, and Torvok broadcast the recording on every frequency, certain that he had shown the humans the futility of their threats on the bridge of the unconquered sun. Admiral Tanaka watched the broadcast in silence. Around her, officers cursed and wept and called for blood, but she remained still, her face carved from stone, her eyes fixed on the image of a woman dying with courage that put warriors to shame. "Admiral?" her tactical officer asked. Waiting for orders, Admiral Tanaka turned away from the screen and spoke 2 words that would end a civilization. "Launch everything." The Prometheus to cloak it appeared from nowhere, a ship that seemed to eat light rather than reflect it, angular and wrong and terrible in ways that made observers feel sick just to look at it. For a single heartbeat it hung in space beside Torvok's flagship, and then it fired. The weapon had no name, because no name could describe what it did. It was not a laser or a missile or a plasma bolt. It was something worse. Something that humanity had built in secret and prayed they would never have to. Yustavuk's flagship did not explode. It simply ceased to exist, unmade at the molecular level, erased from reality so completely that not even atoms remained. One moment there was a ship with 300 Vraxians aboard, and the next moment there was nothing but empty space and the fading echo of screams. Cut short, every Vraxian in the system watched their warlord vanish, and every single one of them understood that they were already dead. They just had not stopped breathing yet. "Boarding parties away," Admiral Tanaka said, her voice carrying no emotion at all. "Bring our people home." The assault shuttles launched from the troop carriers, each one packed with stellar marines in powered armor that made them look like demons of metal and fury. They crossed the distance to the asteroid base in minutes, their ships dodging defensive fire that seemed pitiful against such overwhelming. Fourth Sergeant Major David Okafor was first through the breach, his rifle already firing at the Vraxian guards who tried to stop him. He was a large man, dark-skinned and scarred from a dozen battles, and he moved through the enemy corridors like death itself had taken human form. "Hostile down," he called out, stepping over a body, moving to holding cell. "Stay tight. Stay focused." Behind him came his squad, 20 Marines who had trained together for 3 years and knew each other's movements like they knew their own heartbeats. They flowed through the station like water through cracks, finding paths through the chaos, eliminating resistance with brutal efficiency. Vraxians who raised weapons were killed. Vraxians who dropped their weapons were bound and left for processing. There was no anger in the Marines, no hatred. Just cold professional determination to complete their mission and bring their people home in the holding cells. The 11 surviving humans heard the gunfire and felt hope spark in their chests for the first time since their capture. Captain Chun pulled his crew into the corner of the room and placed himself between them and the door. Ready to face whatever came through, the door exploded inward, and a figure in black armor stepped through with a rifle raised and ready. For one terrible moment, Chun thought it was another Vraxian come to finish what Torvok had started. But then the figure's helmet retracted, and he saw a human face beneath. "Captain Chun?" The Marine asked, her voice strong and sure. "Yes," Chun managed, his voice breaking. "Yes, we are the crew of the Meadow Lark." The Marine nodded and spoke into her communications unit. "Package secured 11 souls. All alive. Dr. Elena Vos is confirmed here." She turned back to Chun, and her expression softened just slightly. "We are here to take you home, sir. Please follow me." The extraction took 11 minutes from first breach to final departure. The Marines moved the rescued crew through corridors that were littered with Vraxian bodies, past walls scarred by weapons fire, through the ruins of what had once been a thriving raider base. Young Thomas Park, still holding his broken ribs, stopped at one point and stared at a Marine who had taken a wound to his arm during the fighting. "You came all this way for us?" he asked, his voice thick with wonder. The Marine smiled, and it was not a kind smile, but it was a real one. "We would have come twice as far," he said simply. "You are ours, and we do not leave our people behind." On the unconquered sun, medical teams were waiting as the shuttles docked. Doctors and nurses rushed forward to help the rescued crew, wrapping them in blankets and running scanners over their injuries and speaking soft words of comfort. Admiral Tanaka came down to the medical bay personally to meet them. She walked among the survivors and spoke to each one individually, asking their names and telling them they were safe now, that they were home. When she reached Captain Chun, she stopped and looked into his eyes with an expression he could not read. "Dr. Elena Vos," she said. "Tell me about her." Chun felt tears running down his face as he spoke about the botanist who had loved the stars, who had spent her life studying alien plants on distant worlds, who had died with a smile on her face and courage in her heart. "She knew you were coming," Chun said. She told him. Right before the end, she told him that you would make him answer for what he did. Admiral Tanaka nodded slowly and made a note on her datapad. "Her name will go on the Wall of the Fallen," she said, "and the Marines who died in the breach will join her there. In our culture, there is no hierarchy of sacrifice." She put her hand on Chun's shoulder and squeezed gently. "Welcome home, Captain. You and your crew are safe now, and you will never be alone again." Behind them, through the windows of the medical bay, the Vraxian base was burning. The humans were thorough in their vengeance, leaving nothing standing that could be used again. But they did not destroy everything. They left one station intact, gutted and empty. As a message to anyone who might be watching, the message was simple. This is what happens when you take what is ours. The human fleet withdrew as quickly as it had come, taking its dead and its living and its terrible warships back into the darkness from which they had emerged. They left behind them a ruined base, a scattered species, and a galaxy that would never look at humanity the same way again. On the diplomatic station of the Collective Assembly, representatives from 100 species gathered to discuss what they had witnessed. The chamber buzzed with voices speaking in 1,000 languages, all of them asking the same impossible question. How could any species respond with such overwhelming force for such a small number of individuals? Ambassador Corthan of the Morvathi hegemony stood before the assembly and delivered the report that his military analysts had prepared. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence as he read the numbers that still did not make sense even after dozens of reviews. The humans deployed 47 warships, 3 dreadnoughts, 200,000 combat personnel, and an unknown vessel of terrifying capability, he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. The estimated cost of this operation, in resources and economic disruption, exceeds the value of purchasing a small planetary system. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Species that had built empires through careful calculation could not comprehend spending so much for so little. Our War College has updated its threat assessment, Corton continued. The recommendation is simple. Do not engage humanity. Do not provoke humanity, and above all, do not take what belongs to humanity. The Ithari Consortium representative, a slender being made of crystal and light, raised a tendril to speak. We have run the calculations 17 times and reached an inescapable conclusion. Humans do not calculate the value of individual lives the way other species do, because to them, each life has infinite value. That is irrational, protested a delegate from a species known for cold logic. Yes, the Ithari agreed. And yet it makes them the most dangerous species in the known galaxy, because you cannot negotiate with a people who will spend everything they have for a single soul on the Vraxian homeworld. The High Council met in emergency session to determine how to survive the aftermath of Torvok's foolishness. They had already broadcast their disavowal, already declared his clan to be renegades and criminals, already offered reparations to the human government, but they knew it might not be enough. Elder Vorsha, the oldest member of the council, spoke with a voice that trembled with age and fear. I have studied the humans since this began, she said. I have watched their history, read their literature, analyzed their wars, and I have learned something that terrifies me. The other counselors leaned forward, desperate for wisdom that might save them. We thought they were soft because they smile and because they create art, and because they love their children and their pets and even strangers they have never met. Vorsha said, we thought their emotions made them weak. But we were wrong, so very wrong. She pulled up images on the central display, photographs and videos from human history soldiers holding dying friends, parents protecting children, ordinary people rushing toward danger to help strangers in need. Their emotion do not make them weak, Vorsha continued. Their emotions are why they fight. They love so deeply that they will destroy anyone who threatens what they love. And they feel loss so keenly that they will burn worlds to avenge it. She paused and looked at her fellow counselors with eyes that had seen 10,000 years of Vraxian history. The songs they sing, the poems they write, the tears they shed, these are not signs of weakness. These are how they process grief. And they have had much practice because they have lost so much throughout their terrible history on Earth. Admiral Tanaka delivered her official report to the council in a chamber that was silent with respect and sorrow. She stood straight despite her exhaustion, her uniform pressed and perfect, her voice steady as she recounted the operation from beginning to end. 12 individuals were reported captured in Vraxian space, she said. 11 were recovered alive. 1 was killed by the enemy before rescue operations could be completed. She paused and took a breath before continuing. 2 Marines were killed in action during the boarding operation, and 17 sustained injuries, all injured. Personnel are expected to make full recoveries. A counselor raised his hand to speak. Admiral, there are those who say our response was excessive, that we spent resources and risked lives disproportionate to the value of those we sought to rescue. Admiral Tanaka looked at the man with eyes that had seen more death than he could imagine, and she did not flinch from his question. When I was a young officer, I lost my first command to pirates. 47 people died while I watched from an escape pod. Unable to do anything, she stepped away from the podium and walked toward the windows that looked out over the city of her birth. The city that had rebuilt itself a dozen times throughout human history. My grandmother was taken during a war when she was just a girl. Her entire village was captured and she died alone. Wondering if anyone remembered her name or cared that she was gone, Admiral Tanaka turned back to face the council with conviction burning in her eyes. That will never happen again, not to any human. Not while we draw breath. We will spend every resource we have. We will risk every life we can muster. We will cross the galaxy itself if that is what it takes. Because that is who we are. The council approved her report unanimously 6 months later. A young Ithari diplomat visited Earth as part of a cultural exchange program. She had studied human history and psychology, had read their literature and watched their films, had done everything she could to understand the species that had shaken the galaxy with their response to a small distress call. She met with a human ambassador named Thomas Park, the same young scientist who had been rescued from the Vraxian raiders, now working to help other species understand his people. "I must ask you something," the Ithari said, her crystalline form flickering with curiosity. A question that has haunted the assembly since the incident in the Velen corridor. "Please," Thomas said, gesturing for her to continue. "Why?" the Ithari asked, and her voice carried the weight of 1 billion confused beings across 1,000 worlds. "Why so much for so few?" Thomas Park thought about his answer for a long moment. He thought about the Marines who had come through the door of his cell, about the Admiral who had welcomed him home, about Dr. Elena Voss who had died believing that rescue was coming. He thought about what it meant to be human, to be part of a species that had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars, that had fought wars and built civilizations and created art and music and love in the face of an uncaring universe. And then he smiled. A genuine smile that carried all the warmth and all the danger that made humanity what it was. "Because they were ours," he said simply. "And that is all the reason we have ever needed." The Ithari diplomat recorded his answer and sent it back to her people, who studied it and debated it and ultimately added it to their assessment of humanity. A species that could not be bought, could not be threatened, could not be reasoned with when their people were in danger. They were kind because they chose to be kind, generous because they chose to be generous, peaceful because they chose to be peaceful. But when someone took what was theirs, they became something else entirely. They became a force that the galaxy learned to respect and to fear, and to never underestimate again. On the wall of the Fallen on Luna Station, 30 names were carved into the black stone. Dr. Elena Voss and the 2 Marines who died bringing her crew home, and every day humans came to stand before those names and remember what they meant. The inscription at the base of the wall was simple. Just 5 words that summarized everything humanity believed about the value of a single life. They were ours, we came. And somewhere in the vastness of space, other species watched and learned and understood at last what humanity had always known, that love was not a weakness but a weapon, and that there was nothing more dangerous in all the universe than a people who would cross the stars for their own. The SOS had been small. The response had been everything humanity had, and it always would be.